Who is the founder of Christianity? Is it Jesus, whom the Christians worship? But Christianity isn't the religion of Jesus. Rather, it is the religion about Jesus. So who then is the founder of Christianity? Was it perhaps Paul, the most important convert of Christianity, who spearheaded the Christian message to the Gentiles outside the Roman province of Judea? Did Paul and Jesus have the same message? Would Jesus and Paul even agree with one another? I mean, they're both preachers who believed the world was going to end shortly in their time, right? Jesus and Paul no doubt have their differences. This is nothing special though. It's not even surprising really when you think about it. As I said, Christianity is not the religion of Jesus, it's the religion about Jesus. Jesus, believe it or not, precedes Christianity. Many of the things Paul preached were not things Jesus would have preached about because, well, Jesus wasn't dead yet, let alone believed to have risen back to life by his followers. Despite being in the same canon of books, the gospel narratives and Paul's letters almost never converge. Almost never do you have a story or saying from the Gospels that you find in Paul. But the key word here is almost never, which means they do, in fact, converge at least once, right? The Christian history nerd in me was once frustrated that Paul didn't bother writing about Jesus, even after claiming he knew of his close followers in person, like Peter or his brother James. But it's important to know that Paul's letters are letters, not gospels. They are oftentimes addressed to communities and are the ancient equivalent of, I guess, response videos people make today. Paul's letters, for the most part, don't exhibit claims of fact, but rather claims of policy. We ought to do this, you should do that, etc. They are not narratives, but are letters of instructions to Paul's churches, sometimes addressing specific issues. So if anything, blame these churches for not asking Paul what Jesus did when he was alive, but I digress. The Gospels and Paul's letters are different in many ways, but they do converge a few times. One example is in 1 Corinthians 11:23, the Last Supper dialogue, which closely mirrors the Last Supper in the Gospels, particularly Luke's version. The institution of the Eucharist, which is what Christians call this story, is seen in the three synoptic Gospels and the authentic works of Paul, therefore passing the criterion of multiple attestations. So did this story happen then? Did Jesus say this line? Well, it's a little more complicated than that. This story implies that Jesus knew his death was coming, which you might not see as a problem, but it's problematic for historians trying to reconstruct the historical Jesus because it's inconsistent with reality. Believe what you will about who Jesus truly is, but from the perspective of a historian, you don't just believe claims of people knowing the future. There's a reason why historians, even the Christian ones, say that Jesus was believed to have worked miracles rather than saying Jesus worked miracles outright. There's a difference there. But perhaps this story is different because this is on the eve of Jesus' death. This wasn't 2 weeks or even 2 years before his death. Only a few days ago, Jesus caused trouble in the temple which got the attention of the Jewish authorities who now want him dealt with. Did he perhaps see his death coming then? I don't know. Another problem with this saying for historians is that Jesus here is giving meaning to his coming death by saying that his broken body has been given up to them, his disciples perhaps, and that the cup is the cup of some sort of new covenant. He also says, "Drink this in remembrance of me." Critical historians don't believe that Jesus knew his death was coming or that he predicted it, but that those prediction sayings are later Christian inventions to further justify the need for Jesus to die, and also to make him not look oblivious. Historians believe that Jesus preached a coming kingdom, which was to come in his lifetime. Jesus asking to be remembered comes across like he's not going to be here much longer. The most problematic thing for me is that the very idea of eating flesh or drinking blood is an absolute abomination in Judaism. So that's another problem, that a law-observing, pious Jew like Jesus would ever come up with such foreign symbolisms. The idea of Jesus' literal body and blood being offered or given, in a sense, seems to reflect later Christian understanding of the death of Jesus. Now, Paul claims that he received this tradition from the Lord himself and not from the disciples, Peter, or Jesus' brother James, whom he's mentioned in his works. He claims this tradition is revealed by the Lord Jesus himself. Now, there is an alternative view by Heinrich August Mayer, a German Protestant who wrote commentaries on the New Testament in the 19th century. He essentially argues that with respect to Paul's usage of the Greek words, it merely implies the tradition originated from Jesus, but that it was passed down to him, probably orally. Paul does, after all, use the same Greek word to refer to things that he's actually heard about from other people, not so much from Jesus himself. Paul has other claims of past events as well, or recollections, such as that after Jesus' death, he appeared to Peter first, then to the 12, then to James, his brother. In this case though, he claims that he's heard of this story rather than this story being a divine revelation. Compare this to the later Gospels where the tradition seems to be that Jesus appeared to the women first, then the 11 disciples, then he ascends to heaven. This is one of those times where I don't have an answer, but the fact that this story or tradition appears in the letters of Paul around a decade earlier than the first Gospel of Mark perhaps tells us that this is one of the earlier traditions and stories. It also shows us that the followers of Jesus were in fact telling stories about them, spreading them through word of mouth. It further intrigues me to see that Paul and the Gospel of Luke share a more similar account rather than the Gospel of Mark, which was written decades earlier than Luke. But what do you think? Did Jesus really say this? Does it even matter? Let me know.